Good evening, I'm Ellen Roberts. I'll be hosting Senior Issues, Etc. today. Our guest is Elizabeth Thielen, and our topic is going to be on gambling disorders. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Will you give us a little intro about yourself and the organization you work for?
Sure. My name is Elizabeth Thielen. I am Senior Director at NICASA Behavioral Health Services. We've been serving Lake County since 1966, so for over 50 years. We provide a variety of services for mental health counseling, substance use disorder, family services. I'm a licensed professional counselor and also a problem and compulsive gambling counselor.
That's very interesting. I think it's very topical considering all the gambling and stuff that's happens nowadays. When I was a child, gambling was, you went to Vegas to gamble.
Right.
So, what is gambling for, a definition to start with?
A good definition is when you are risking something of value on an event for which the outcome is unknown in the hopes of winning something more of value, usually money. And we all know that bingo and slot machines and poker, that is gambling. But there are other forms of gambling that we may not realize, such as lottery, going to the horse track. There is online gambling. Video gaming terminals have kind of popped up around our community. They might be in the local pizza pub. So there are a variety of different types of gambling coming up around us, and there is some talk about opening up Illinois for sports betting as well.
Well, I had heard something about that on the radio the other day, so that's sort of a new possibility
Yes.
that we've got here. Now, all gambling isn't bad. I mean, you have your sports teams, your rivalries in college and everything else, or mayors bet pizzas and cheesecake and everything else.
Right.
So,
and donuts, right?
Right.
Right. So gambling isn't bad, and I'm certainly not here to give that impression. Most people who gamble responsibly. Unfortunately, there's a small percentage of people who gamble who develop a serious problem. And it's those people that I want to reach out to so that we can make sure that we offer prevention and treatment for those people.
Because it's apparently very easy to slide from just a, friendly gambler into a problem.
Correct.
And, how would you know that you've suddenly, gone over that line?
Right. So there are a number of signs of problem gambling that somebody could look out for. One, do they need to increase the amount that they bet in order to feel the same level of excitement? Do they find themselves chasing their losses, so they lose one day and they return another day in order to try to win it back? Are they very preoccupied with gambling, spending a lot of time thinking about gambling, whether it's past wins or future play, trying to figure out how to get money to continue playing? Do you gamble to escape personal problems? Do you have to borrow money in order to pay gambling debt or pay for bills that you can't pay because you've been gambling? Do you find that you are lying about the extent of your gambling? Those are some of the signs that somebody might see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that, you probably start small and build into that, I would think. So that, these can create real problems with people in terms of, finances and job loss, especially if you're cutting out of work to place a bet or something.
Correct. People can sometimes leave work to gamble, and then they find themselves spending more time away that they had planned, and they might be missing work because they were up very late gambling. They may be very preoccupied with their losses, and so they're not very productive at work. There are some people who even find themselves dipping into the till at work and borrowing money unbeknownst to their employer in order to keep playing in the hopes of winning and putting it back. And so job problems or job loss is just one of the issues that a problem gambler can encounter. There's also a higher rate of divorce, there's home foreclosures, bankruptcy, right up through loss of life. Unfortunately, people with problem gambling have the highest suicide rate of any of the addictions.
Really? More so than other addictions?
More so than other addictions.
That
Yeah, and there are a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is the financial devastation that can happen with problem gambling is just so excessive, and it can happen so fast that people sometimes feel that there's no way they're going to get out of it.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. The speed with which gambling can take over your life or your savings account.
Correct.
And is there an estimate on the number of problem gamblers or a percentage of people who gamble who
Right.
fall into, this problem?
Yes, it's about 2% of gamblers or people will develop a gambling problem, and that equates to about 14,000 people in Lake County, and there are probably about 240,000 Illinoisans with a gambling disorder.
My goodness, that many in Lake County alone.
Yes.
That's surprising.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Not everybody, of course, gambles who develops a problem. Are there any, and there aren't really signs knowing going into it that, oh, I should avoid this because I'm going to be a problem gambler, really.
Right. Well, some people are at a greater risk, and so if you do have one of those risk factors, you might want to be more careful and make sure you're aware of responsible gaming options and know the signs and symptoms. So one of the risk factors are, young adults and adolescents are at an increased risk. People with a family history of drug or alcohol addiction have an increased risk of developing a gambling problem. Seniors are actually at increased risk of developing a gambling problem. And that's an interesting statistic because seniors who gamble have also been found to be healthier than seniors that don't gamble. And so that's one of those things where you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a matter of having organized, social, stimulating activity can be healthy for people. But knowing that there's also an increased risk of developing a problem means it's even more important for seniors and for people who care about them to be aware of the signs and symptoms of gambling disorder and reach out for help quickly if they see any of them.
Okay, so is that because once we retire, we have a little more time to, go to the bingo parlors, or there are more? It used to be, as a child, it was, churches one night a week. Now they have, all-day bingo at some of the places.
Right. Well, there are a lot of reasons for that. There are a lot of life changes that can happen, whether it is loss, so people are dealing with grief and they may be dealing with it by gambling. There's a lot of life changes as far as their roles. So people have entered retirement, they may have health problems that they're coping with, they may be lonely, and so there are some increased risks there. And sometimes there's even medications that can increase someone's risk. So there are some medications, including those for Parkinson's disease, restless leg syndrome, and for bipolar disorder, that can actually take somebody from what we might consider a social gambler into problem gambling.
Oh, that's interesting, because you don't think of, you think of medications as helpful generally, and not causing a gambling situation. That they just have, well, I suppose they have, impact on your nerves and mental outlook and things like that. And that seniors who are gambling can sometimes be healthier than others. Is that because group outings and socialization?
That's exactly it. And it's stimulating and it's something to look forward to. So if somebody's lonely and maybe they don't really do much, don't have anything to get up and get dressed for and look forward to, compared to somebody who has these outings that they look forward to, they get to interact with other people and they get to engage in something that's stimulating their brain. So there can be some health outcomes. So it's just really a matter of being informed, being aware, and being prepared to reach out for help if you're one of those people that when you gamble in an unhealthy way.
Now, if you're a family member or a friend, are there any indications that we might pick up on that could, help the gambler or just?
Well, as we were talking about earlier, it's actually really difficult compared to alcohol and drugs. There's no smell. You wouldn't smell that somebody had been gambling. There's no odor. There's no test for it. You can't do a urine test or a blood test. And so the signs might be more subtle. And so really keeping an eye on the finances. So is there money that is going away with no explanation? Does somebody have to borrow money frequently? Are they very nervous and irritable when they are not gambling, for example? Those are some of the things to look out for. And generally, when you are concerned about a loved one for any reason, whether you are saying, do they maybe have some depression or anxiety? Are they maybe using substances? The important thing to do is just to add the question, could they be gambling? So just adding that to one of the things that you would consider if there's somebody in your life that's struggling might help you to reach out to them and say, hey, is there possibly some gambling going on that's causing some problems in your life, and how can I help?
Okay, and so are there any things, questions or phrasing for questions to somebody you suspect of this, so you don't shut them off?
Right.
Or things to say, things not to say.
Right. Well, it's important to normalize it because most people who are experiencing a gambling problem aren't aware of what's happening. We're just not well informed as a society. We all know about alcoholism, we all know about drug addiction, but we're not very well versed about gambling addiction. And so just talking about it in general conversation, saying, hey, I saw this show, or I read this article and it told me about gambling addiction and I had no idea. I hope that people who are experiencing that reach out for help. Or I heard about Gamblers Anonymous, or I heard that there's counseling. Those kinds of conversations can really open up the door to conversation if somebody's struggling.
Okay, and we really shouldn't step in and try and fix it for them, like, oh, I can pay off that debt and then everything will be better, you know.
Right. In general, when somebody steps in and fixes the finances of somebody who has a gambling problem, that's called a bailout. In general, bailouts tend to lead to more gambling. So it would be important for somebody who's considering helping somebody with a gambling problem with their finances to get some help for themselves, get some counseling for themselves, to figure out how can we create some healthy boundaries and try to help this person rather than enable them. And I would never say don't bail somebody out, because sometimes there are some circumstances where, whether it's a minor or a senior who's important to this person's life, might be harmed by not jumping in and trying to help this person out. And so it's more a matter of getting some professional input. There is a group called Gam-Anon, which is much like Al-Anon, and it is for loved ones of problem gamblers. And so that could be one place that somebody could get some information and support on how to help the loved one that they have versus enabling them. And then there are also counseling programs that are available for family members of people with problem gambling.
Well, that's good, because you don't think of, you know, you're sort of out on your own. What do I think should happen? Or talk to your, and you wouldn't talk to your friends if you think of a family member's having a gambling problem, because, you know, we all keep the family secrets sort of tucked in there, which is, you know, good and in some cases bad to help with it.
Right, and the more that we talk about these things, and as I said earlier, the more we normalize them, then people can talk about it and say, yeah, that happened to my friend, or that happened to my neighbor. I heard about this program, or I heard about Gamblers Anonymous. So it is something that we know that addiction kind of thrives in secrecy. So the more people talk about it, the more people will come to care and get better.
Well, that's great, because, you know, I had never heard of Gam-Anon before. I had heard of Al-Anon, but this is a whole different thing. And you know, and some people can be very judgmental, and so that, you know, you don't want to put yourself in that situation. And I'm sure if, you know, if you have a gambling problem, you probably the last one to realize it. I'm thinking.
And so the way, it's really interesting because it's very similar to other addictions, but it's also very different. And when you're experiencing a gambling problem and you might have a lot of financial losses as a result, sometimes the only solution that seems viable is to continue gambling, to try to win a jackpot and win it all back. And so that's why when somebody is experiencing a gambling problem, they tend to just keep playing until they are in this state of desperation. And so you're right that they often don't come to care and get help because they're kind of stuck in this endless chase to try to get back even. And unfortunately, the more they play, the deeper into debt they tend to get.
I hadn't thought about that, that's probably one of the few addictions where you think, if I take more of my drug of choice, I'll be better, instead of most people thinking if I take less, I'll be better.
That's right.
That, and like you said, you can't, you know, walking down the street, you wouldn't know the person next to you was a gambler or not. Whereas somebody stumbling along, you'd think they'd have some physical problem. There are more outward indicators, and there are also some things with drugs and alcohol that kind of interrupt an episode. For example, if I'm drinking and I continue drinking, at a certain point my brain is kind of going to shut it down. I'm either going to pass out, I might even have alcohol poisoning. Same thing with drugs. The more that somebody consumes, at a certain point that episode has to stop. There is no such episode with gambling. As long as somebody can keep accessing funds, they can keep playing. And so this might mean that they are maxing out credit cards, taking out loans, getting a car note loan, or payday advance loans. And sometimes they're borrowing from other people or taking from other sources of
funds that are not theirs to take. And so, unfortunately, there is a high rate of crime amongst problem gamblers. About half of problem gamblers commit crime as a result of their gambling problem.
Oh my goodness, I hadn't thought of that. That, well, you know, it makes sense. And you know, when we're talking that the gambling industry, and it's a good business model. You don't. It's all on credit card, or you know, you aren't really opening up your wallet and realizing, oh, there's nothing left in here, I should stop now.
Right.
That they can, you know, it's easy to get in a lot deeper than you thought you were.
Right. And so whether it's online gambling or at a casino or one of the other forms, the research shows that the more removed you are from your own tangible money, the more likely you are to risk it. And so if it's something where it's linked to a credit card or some sort of voucher, you might play more than you had intended.
Could see, and it seems like I remember talking about, you know, you don't really have clocks in casinos or things like that. So you know, it's all enclosed. You don't realize that it's, you know, you've been there for 8 hours or longer. So, oh my goodness, that's. Are there any over-the-counter medications that can be problematic, or?
Well, as I mentioned, there are some prescription medications that can actually lead to gambling disorder, but there are also some medications that can help people with gambling problems, and so both over-the-counter supplements and prescription medications. And so it's important that if anybody is struggling with a gambling problem and they think that they might want to consider a medication that could help deal with the cravings, that they talk to their physician. And sometimes a physician may not be familiar with these particular medications or not comfortable prescribing. And then in that event, they can ask to be referred to a physician that they could talk to more about that.
Well, that's good. And you know, the mental health and I suppose pastors and but that's probably not again something that a lot of you know, ministers or priests have been counseled for. I would think it's kind of a new. In the last 30, 40 years, really, gambling has come up in the every state of the union, I think, if not almost.
Right, yeah, there are currently 48 states that have legalized gambling. And so we do know that accessibility to gambling has increased. Like I said, we've got lottery, we've got bingo, we've got online gambling, we've got video poker terminals around us, and we're also looking at sports betting legislation. One of the concerns about that is we know that there are high social costs to problem gambling. It's estimated in Illinois that about $218 million per year are the social costs of problem gambling. And so anytime we're looking at any sort of legislation to expand, it's important that there's specific wording in there to designate a percentage of the profits to prevent problem gambling, to treat problem gambling, and to fund research to determine the extent of gambling disorder in the community and effective ways to help.
Now, do most counties in Illinois have an organization like yours to help people?
Well, actually, there are only 9 agencies in Illinois that have a contract to provide gambling services. We're the only one in Lake County, so there are 8 other agencies throughout the state. I will say that Lake County is kind of leading the forefront in that they designate the funds from their video gaming of unincorporated Lake County to help problem gamblers. And so throughout the state, that's really not typical of what's happening from that revenue, but that's really admirable, and it's really to be emulated elsewhere.
Well, that's wonderful, because you know, it would be easy to take in all the money because the state of Illinois needs money, but in the long run, working to save this problem keeps things going for them.
Right, and so whenever we're looking at profits, we have to remember that those profits directly equate to losses of the people who were playing. And so we do need to work on preventing and treating problem gambling to use those profits to help people. At NICASA, we do offer low-cost or free counseling to anybody regardless of income. And as we spoke about, the losses can be extreme. And so somebody could have in the 6 figures, but they could have $200,000 in gambling debt. And so we never want their inability to pay for treatment to get in the way. And so that's why we are able to use our state contract and the county funds to help whoever needs treatment for problem gambling, and it could be also for the family members of the problem gambler.
Well, and I assume it's kind of like the old saying, you know, a stitch in time. The sooner you come in, when you start recognizing the problem, instead of, like you said, trying to chase the cure down the rabbit hole.
Right, that's a really good point. And we do tend to get people who have been through some real devastating losses by the time they come to us. Of course, we are always going to help those people. We would love to get people earlier on when they are starting to gamble, starting to be a little concerned about how they're gambling, because we can work with them. Not everybody who comes into treatment has to quit gambling. Sometimes it's a matter of, let's make sure you're aware of responsible gambling strategies. Let's see if you can do those. If you can't do those, do we need to look at a period of quitting? Do we need to look at quitting and entering recovery from problem gambling? So there's a lot that can be done. And we will also provide free workshops for any interested group. So any group, whether it's a church, a school, we are happy to come in and provide a free workshop about responsible gambling, problem gambling, so that people can be educated a little bit earlier on and recognize if there's any troubles occurring in somebody that they care about, so that people can come to care a lot earlier.
So I assume that, you know, when someone comes in, this is confidential, so you don't have to worry
Yes.
about, you know.
Right.
You know,
That's
people,
right.
you know,
People are concerned about that. People have privacy concerns. And for that reason, all of our counseling sessions are private. We also have a location in Highland Park that is a smaller satellite site. And for people with serious confidentiality and privacy concerns, we can schedule them in a way that there's nobody scheduled before them or after them, so that it's very discreet. And then we also offer phone counseling. So phone counseling can be helpful for people who do have privacy concerns, whether it's a position that they're in, they don't want other people to see them. But sometimes they have obstacles. They don't have transportation. They may have health problems that keep them from leaving the home. So we can offer phone counseling for those people too.
Are there 24-hour lines where you can
Yes.
call because, you
Yes.
know, middle of the night?
Right, right. And sometimes that's when those crises happen, 2 in the morning. So Illinois has a statewide helpline. It's 1-800-GAMBLER. So that's easy for people to remember, 1-800-GAMBLER. There are professionals that answer that line, and they will help connect people to treatment and support. And it can be the gambler or the loved one of the problem gambler that calls. There's also a website, weknowthefeeling.org, and at that website they can have access to a live chat with those helpline staff too.
Well, that's good. Is this, the gambling, are they set up similar to AA and like 12-step programs, or different ones for different people? Because not
Yeah.
everything works for.
Right,
you know.
right. There are 12 steps specifically for problem gambling. So Gamblers Anonymous, just like Alcoholics Anonymous, and there are meetings throughout the county. There's also Gam-Anon meetings, as I mentioned, like Al-Anon, throughout the county, throughout the state. And that 1-800-GAMBLER helpline can help connect people to any of those programs, to our treatment program or another treatment program, and other resources.
Well, it's, you know, it's been very interesting hearing about this, because it's not something that, you know, you think about very much if you're not someone who gambles or whatever. I mean,
Right.
I've been to a casino a few times, but
Right, right.
you know, that's
Yeah.
not everybody does. But
Right.
I can see it is fun, you know, go down with the bus of people and, you know,
Right.
get going. And,
Right.
and like you said, it's not necessarily bad.
Right.
It's just, you know, you have to be aware of things. And I'm so glad you could come in and
Thank
talk
you.
with us today, because it's not just for seniors. It could be their members of their family or friends or, you know,
Right.
together. So,
Yeah.
you know, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being here.
And I want to say one last thing, that seniors don't have to gamble to be affected by problem gambling. Sometimes seniors can be victims of financial exploitation of somebody who is in their life that has a gambling problem. So that's important to remember too.
Okay, well, as the show is always ends on, and as Vita, our soul and inspiration, always says, you know, remember that the best is yet to come, and when we get to the end of our rope, you know, tie that knot and hang on, and everything's going to be fine. And
Thank
catch
you.
the spirit.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.